Hello, George Rusty Cat here, aka Knuckle Vermilion, or Nico if you prefer. And for this video, I am going to be doing a sort of response, most likely a two-parter response to a YouTuber by the name of TheDavoo or TheDavoo, I don't know. I'm at the moment for this video, I'm just going to refer to him as Dave because it just makes sense to me. And the video that he does is what's called um oh god, I forgot the name of it, but the opening summary says it all in his video, which is that we should be ripping off this RPG called wow, this RPG called Undertale. Wow, I almost said cave story there. But yes, with Undertale, now I would not go wording it like that because when it comes to the word rip off, although it's an umbrella slang, it is it generally defines something that is at best a shoddy knockoff and at worst absolute plagiarism. Now, did he say to do that? No, absolutely not. We should not be making shoddy knockoffs of Undertale. We should not be plagiarizing Undertale. However, everything he goes into is what would be described as emulation. You know, basically you're emulating various elements that have been utilized within Undertale. To which case I would agree that there's a lot of great things. I myself have not played it, but I have watched other people's playthroughs of Undertale, mostly in chunks so I don't spoil the whole story for myself. And I have to say, it looks very interesting. Looks like the kind of game that I would get into. Aside from what I found out about Genocide Run, but whatever, I'll get whatever. That's not important. Now, Dave went about going with this whole thing of 5 points on emulating Undertale. And although it looks at he references Undertale, I would say I would agree, but only because these are also elements that I've seen in other games I've played and elements that I would actually love to see used more often. So that's basically where I'm coming from with this. Um, Now then, the first thing he says is that first point he makes is about making an RPG that's about something other than fighting. Now, to an extent, I can actually agree with this, mostly because I myself have played classic tabletop RPGs. One example being Beyond the Supernatural. This one being second edition, which most people say isn't so bad. Now I know what some people would say. Some people go by their experiences. Funny choice of words there, considering what I'm going to reference in a minute. But their experiences with what Dungeons and Dragons is supposed to be, which is PvP, raid the dungeons, slay monsters, and that's about it. Except for the fact that not all RPGs like that. I mean, hell, even with Dungeons and Dragons, it isn't like that. Though that also is dependent on what kind of game you're playing. Like, do you play to raid? Are you playing to because there's this big war and you're in charge of diplomacy? Are you in charge of assassination? You got all sorts of stuff that can play out within a Dungeons and Dragons game. Now then, but this isn't Dungeons and Dragons. I'm talking about Beyond the Supernatural, which, as you could tell from the name, involves supernatural horrors, such as the Boogeyman. Now then, Boogeyman, Hellhounds, whatever. Um, Oddly enough, this game actually does, well, with the Palladium system, even though it takes a lot of criticism, the Palladium system itself does have a lot of options for you to take other than fighting. As a matter of fact, even with the experience system, um, like down here, I'm actually on the experience tables on how to reward actions and whatnot. Stuff that would be regarded as role play, you know, as opposed to role playing, as in rolling dice. Let's see. One of the examples here, um, ah, let's see, one example, 50 to 100 experience points for a small act of self-sacrifice or an act of kindness, mercy, or compassion. In other words, if someone wound up, if you're chasing a criminal and the criminal winds up making a deal with a devil or a demon or whatever, you stop the demon, but the criminal realizes his mistakes and is begging for mercy. Um, you can actually the game master can choose to reward the player with extra experience points for showing the criminal mercy rather than outright killing them for summoning a great evil. Now then, as I say with pen and paper RPGs, people usually don't think about that when it comes to RPGs. When it comes to RPGs, people normally think about Final Fantasy or basically anything from Square Enix past and present, which means taking turns and killing monsters and pardon, taking turns and killing monsters to gain points to become more powerful and whatnot. And even if it's not Final Fantasy and whatnot, if it's not going to be a Square Enix game, it's going to be a Blizzard game with something like World of Warcraft or Diablo, and that's what people usually think with RPGs. So the tricky part of it is actually doing that whole thing of making an RPG that's, or rather in this case, a digital RPG that has more to it other than fighting. Now, I have actually played game RPGs where you have extra options. Um, Looking at how Undertale plays, I immediately thought of the Shin Megami Tensei series. This one being Persona and this one being Strange Journey, which, yep, they're good. Now, with those games, although you do have the usual stuff such as there's the big bad of the area, kill it off, and whatnot. However, during regular battles, you can also negotiate with monsters. Sometimes you get experience points from negotiations, other times you don't. But you can also get items. You can even have certain beings actually join you and grant you power and stuff like that, depending on how the negotiations go. And it isn't just those games. Even on the past ones, back when a Shin Megami game was translated as a Revelations game here in the States. There was one called, I think it was called Demon Slayer or something on the Game Boy. I don't remember where my copy of that went to. But that was another one where you had the same kind of thing, which is negotiate with monsters, and monsters can even join you, rather than actually getting into a fight with a monster. And that is how the things go. And that's kind of the same thing I see in Undertale. And I like that, the option of a negotiation instead of just outright killing. I mean, something like this was even with I don't recall the name of it. I think it was Romancing Saga 2 on the PlayStation. Kind of had the same thing where if a monster was weak and wanted mercy, you wanted to run away, you could just allow it to run away, and it won't have any negative effect on you. And that's basically it. Now, but if you were to have the option of no fighting at all, just like negotiations and stuff like that, and other things, stuff that contributes to actual role playing rather than the usual kill gain experience, upgrades, sort of thing. Due to people thinking of an RPG typically being something from Square Enix or Blizzard, there's going to be people who argue over semantics as to whether or not it should count as an RPG. You know, um, many adventure games, for example, will have a level up system, and in which case you call it an adventure RPG. One such example, going back to Square Enix, would be Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts actually does that, and people still call that an RPG, which makes perfect sense because even though you don't have the whole role play aspect to it, you still have a lot of role play like elements that is a large part of the game. Now, a lot of people will be fine with calling that an RPG, but if you're going to do the same thing and have an adventure game where it's all where there isn't much of a focus on combat, but it is still the focus of role play, people are inclined to say it's not an RPG. Some even are against the idea of calling it an adventure game, and some just refer to calling them, saying they're not games, they're what's called walking novels. And I think that's a shame, really. And it is just that, like, if it's dialogue heavy instead of exploration heavy, then it's called a visual novel. And visual novels are great in a lot of games. There's actually a lot of games that are like a mix of RPG and visual novel that are great, but a lot of people still say they're visual novels, they don't count as RPGs. And because of the whole thing of walking novel and visual novel, people saying those aren't games. Um, to cut it short, it, it's an argument over semantics. I mean, as a matter of fact, when I was in what you call middle school, I actually played this. Like, I mean, we see it more often nowadays, and I'm kind of glad, which is a RPG where you're running a shop. I've actually played one of those on a Mac, like middle school or whatever you want to call it. Don't remember the name of the game, but I played something like that. And the thing is, although such games can count as RPGs, the thing is that with such games, they're not going to go the whole thing of it's not a game or not, but they will call it a simulator. They'll call it a shop simulator. Simulator, and just the same, there's a lot of other games out there that are RPGs that are rich in role play elements, but don't have the combat system. And because of that, and the whole thing of people wanting to argue over semantics and people being afraid of being wrong, they're going to say that it's not an RPG, it's not a game. And they'll say, refer to it as either some sort of interactive novel or they'll refer to it as a simulator. And I do admit I have done this myself a few times, and I understand this mindset. But at the same time, I myself have refrained from this mindset because it really is a needless splitting of hairs. But that's just what it is. The downfall of trying to make an RPG that's about something other than fighting is basically just that, which is people get into the semantics and saying that if it doesn't have a combat system, it doesn't count as an RPG, or if it doesn't have this element or that element. Basically, if it doesn't do what Blizzard has done, if it doesn't do what Square Enix has done, if it does, if you haven't even seen something that you'd see from an Elder Scrolls game or Fallout or any game like that, then it doesn't count as an RPG. Even though there are people who will say, I mean, and I and it's funny that bring up Fallout because I was reading about how people were disappointed with well, from the few people who were disappointed with the latest Fallout game. Some have said that how it's not like the earliest Fallout, and apparently in the earliest Fallout you can actually do what's called a pacifist run, which is another thing that I'm surprised most RPGs don't do, which is the whole concept of a pacifist run, which is another thing that can go hand in hand with negotiation options. But yes, can it work? Yes, but chances are it'll be like in past games in which people will get into semantics and say it's not an RPG. So yes. Well, this is part one of my response. Next part, I'll be going into more of the individual points of emulating Undertale.